In the spring of 1931, a Dutch epigrapher working through a batch of unpublished tablets from Nippur found something that did not belong in the stack. He had been cataloguing temple hymns for 3 weeks, grain blessings, prayers to Enlil, the ordinary devotional material a temple archive produces by the thousands. Then he reached a small, badly chipped tablet, barely the size of his palm, and the vocabulary changed completely. It was not addressed to a god. It was addressed to a sleeper. It described the human body at night as something closed inside a structure, deliberately, on purpose, and it named what that structure was built to keep from getting out. He translated 11 lines that afternoon and stopped. In the margin of his notebook, in handwriting noticeably smaller than the rest of the page, he wrote a single question. What is it keeping in or keeping out? He never fully answered it in print. The tablet was logged under a generic hymn classification and shelved, where it stayed for almost 70 years until a researcher cross-referencing sleep terminology in cuneiform medical texts stumbled onto the same 11 lines and realized nobody had ever followed up. So what did the tablet actually say about sleep? Why would a Bronze Age scribe describe something as universal as closing your eyes at night in the language of imprisonment? And why does the description line up uncomfortably well with things about the sleeping brain we didn't confirm until electrodes and brain scanners existed? Stay with me to the end, because the 5th thing this tablet says is the one that modern sleep science still cannot fully explain. And once you hear it, falling asleep tonight is going to feel different. To understand why, you need the standard picture first. The Sumerians are credited, uncontroversially, with the first cities, the first writing system, the first codified laws, the first accurate calendar. Historians don't dispute any of that. It's textbook material. What's disputed is how a Bronze Age population, organized in scattered farming settlements, produced all of that in what looks archaeologically like a single rapid leap. Mainstream scholars call it an open question of cultural development. A smaller group of researchers has always pointed at the Sumerians' own explanation instead. They said none of it was invented locally. They said it was handed to them fully formed by beings they called the Anunnaki, those who came down. Whether you read that as myth or as something else, it's the framework the tablets themselves operate inside, including the one we're looking at today. And in that framework, sleep was not treated as rest. It was treated as containment. The tablet's opening lines describe the body at night as being sealed, not resting, sealed, the same verb Sumerian scribes used for grain stores and locked doors. It says that when a person lies down, the limbs are bound though no rope touches them, and that this binding is deliberate, imposed from outside the sleeper, so that what moves in dream does not move in the world. Read plainly, that's a strange thing to write about sleep. You'd expect a description of rest, of stillness, of peace. Instead, the scribe describes an active restraint, something doing the binding, every single night, to every single person. Here's the uncomfortable part. Roughly 4,000 years before anyone owned an EEG machine, we now know your body genuinely is locked during a portion of every sleep cycle. It's called REM atonia. During rapid eye movement sleep, the stage where most vivid dreaming happens, your brainstem actively shuts off signals to your major skeletal muscles. You are, for a real and measurable stretch of every night, paralyzed. Not figuratively. Your motor neurons are chemically suppressed, so the body cannot act out what the dreaming brain is doing. It's not stillness from rest, it's an enforced lock, engineered by a specific brain circuit every night on schedule. The tablet said the limbs are bound though no rope touches them. That is, functionally, an accurate one-line description of REM atonia, written by someone with no concept of a nervous system. The second passage shifts from the body to something the scribe calls, in the closest available translation, the night river. It says that while the sleeper is bound, a river runs through the house of thought and carries away the dust of the day. Skeptics of this tablet point out, reasonably, that rivers are the single most overused metaphor in the entire Sumerian corpus. This is a river culture, after all. A river washing away the day's dust could just be poetic housekeeping, nothing more. Except that's disturbingly close to something we only discovered in the last 15 years. Your brain has its own private plumbing system called the glymphatic system, and it operates almost exclusively while you sleep. Fluid channels open up between brain cells and flush out metabolic waste, including proteins linked to neurodegeneration that accumulate during waking hours. Your brain, quite literally, gets washed at night. The channels widen, a current moves through, and the debris of the day is carried out. Sit with that for a second. A night river that runs through the house of thought and removes the dust of the day is a startlingly literal description of a cleaning process inside the skull that we didn't observe until we had fluorescent tracers and two-photon microscopy.
Before we go further, I need to pause, because what comes next in the tablet gets significantly stranger, and I've realized some of this doesn't survive being explained out loud in a video. The full line-by-line transliteration, the tablet's catalog reference, and the section connecting this to Sumerian dream omen texts that are already public and studied. I put all of it into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen right now. Take 5 seconds, grab it, keep it open beside you, and let's keep going, because the third passage builds directly on this one. The third passage is the strangest so far. It describes a small stone eye seated in the center of the head that wakes only when the sun is refused. The scribe says this eye does not see the way ordinary eyes see. It doesn't take in shapes or color. Instead, it measures light itself, and its judgment determines when the binding of the limbs begins and when it ends. A stone-like structure centrally located in the head that doesn't process images but instead tracks the presence or absence of light and uses that measurement to control the sleep-wake cycle. That is a fairly precise functional description of the pineal gland. The pineal gland sits deep in the center of the brain. It has a gritty, calcified texture that genuinely earned it comparisons to a small stone in early anatomy texts, and its entire job is to track ambient light and release melatonin accordingly, which is the hormone that governs when your body lucks into sleep and when it releases from it. It is sometimes still informally called the third eye today for exactly this reason. It behaves like a light sensor, even though it doesn't form images. The tablet's "eye that wakes only when the sun is refused" lines line up with a gland whose only real trigger is the absence of light.
The fourth passage is shorter and almost easy to skip past. It says the bound sleeper is carried through the same room many times before waking, and that each time the room is a little different, but the walk back to it happens on a fixed count, not by choice. Mainstream Sumerian scholars, when they've engaged with this tablet at all, read this as a metaphor for repeated or recurring dreams, the kind of thing any culture might describe poetically. But sleep researchers will tell you dreaming isn't continuous through the night, it's cyclical, and the cycle length is remarkably consistent. You pass through roughly 90-minute sleep cycles, moving in and out of REM stages on a fixed rhythm, 4 to 6 times a night, each REM period slightly longer and slightly different in content than the last, but returning to the same basic architecture on a fixed count, not by choice, exactly as the tablet frames it. The scribe wasn't describing a single recurring dream. He was describing the structure of a sleep cycle, something you cannot observe without hours of continuous brainwave monitoring, and something no one confirmed until polysomnography existed in the 20th century. Stop for a second, because what you just heard about the repeating room is the detail that makes the final passage land the way it does. But it only really lands when you see the original Sumerian sign sequence next to the cycle length numbers side by side, and that comparison is laid out in full in the document. The link is in the description. The QR code is on your screen. Take 5 seconds, grab it, and let's finish this, because the fifth thing the tablet says is the one I built this whole video around. I want to be straightforward with you about the real problems with this tablet, because a lot of channels covering material like this skip past them, and that's how you end up trusting something you shouldn't. First, the tablet has never been displayed publicly. It exists only as a catalogue entry and a handful of published transliterations by a small number of specialists, which means independent verification is genuinely limited. Second, Sumerian is not a fully solved language. Even careful, credentialed translators disagree on individual signs, and a single ambiguous sign can shift a passage's entire meaning. Third, and this is the big one, a single Dutch epigrapher working alone in 1931 under pressure to clear a backlog is exactly the kind of translator most likely to project a coherent narrative onto a damaged, ambiguous text. That's not an accusation, it's just how translation bias works, and it has produced false discoveries before in this field. But here's what keeps this tablet from being dismissed outright. Sumerian dream omen texts that are public, catalogued, and studied by mainstream Assyriologists already describe dreams as something that happens to a person who is held still, use body-binding language around sleep independently of this tablet, and separately reference a watching stone associated with the head in medical texts about headaches and vision. None of those texts were written to agree with each other. They surface the same pieces from different angles in different contexts, centuries apart, which is either an enormous coincidence of ancient poetic convention or evidence that the ideas on this tablet weren't invented in isolation.
Here's the tablet the entire tablet was building towards, and it's the one that changes the register completely. The scribe stops describing mechanisms and asks in his own words a plain question. Why bind the sleeper at all. His answer, translated as closely as the signs allow, says that the binding does not exist to protect the body from the dream. It exists to protect the world from the dreamer. Because in the unbound state, the mind walks further than the god allows, and what it finds there does not fade correctly upon return. The tablet says the entire nightly architecture, the lock on the limbs, the cleaning river, the light measuring eye, the fixed cycle, exists for one purpose, to make sure that whatever the mind touches during sleep gets erased on the way back out, every single time, without fail. And this is the part modern neuroscience genuinely cannot close the loop on. We know you dream. REM sleep is well documented. We know the brain is highly active during it, in some respects more active than in waking states. We know the hippocampus, the brain's memory indexing structure, is doing intense work overnight, replaying and reorganizing the day's experiences. But we still do not have a settled, agreed-upon explanation for why the overwhelming majority of dream content is aggressively forgotten within minutes of waking, while the processing itself, the memory consolidation, the emotional recalibration, clearly still happened and still counts. Something is deliberately discarded, while something else is deliberately kept, on a mechanism we can observe in outline but cannot yet fully explain. Sleep scientists will tell you this openly. Dream amnesia is one of the genuinely unresolved questions in the field. Not why we dream, why we're built to forget almost all of it, almost immediately, as if forgetting were the point rather than a side effect. The tablet's answer is uncomfortable precisely because it isn't mystical. It doesn't say the erasure is an accident of biology. It says it's a design requirement, that the entire nightly system exists specifically to guarantee the forgetting happens, because what the unbound mind reaches, according to the scribe, does not fade correctly if the system fails. Lay all 5 back to back. A binding with no rope, and REM atonia paralyzes the body during dreaming. A night river washing away the day's dust, and the glymphatic system flushes metabolic waste from the brain almost exclusively during sleep. A stone eye that wakes only in darkness, and the pineal gland tracks light to govern the sleep cycle. A repeating room on a fixed count, and REM sleep runs in consistent, roughly 90-minute cycles across the night. And finally, a cage built specifically to guarantee forgetting, and dream amnesia remains one of the genuinely open questions in modern sleep science. Maybe all 5 are coincidence, poetic guesses from a culture that watched people sleep for centuries and described what it saw in vivid, metaphor-heavy language, the way every ancient culture did. That's the responsible, likely explanation, and it deserves to be taken seriously. But maybe, and this is the thought the tablet leaves you with, they weren't guessing 5 separate times. Maybe they were describing a system someone had already explained to them. I'm not going to tell you which of those is true. I'll just leave you with this. tonight, when you lie down and your body goes still in a way you never consciously chose, somewhere in a museum drawer, there's a 4,000-year-old description of exactly that moment, written by someone who called it a lock and meant it. If this changed even a little of how you think about the 8 hours you spend unconscious every night, subscribe, because the next tablet I'm opening isn't about sleep at all. It's about what the Sumerians said happens in the seconds right before a person dies, and it's stranger than anything in this video. I'll see you there.